Hello everyone, this is Nayiri from Low Carb and Fasting. Well, our guest today is from South Africa. He's an ex-vegan health and nutrition coach, and he's a PhD student. Now, I invited him because he actively works with people who are transitioning from a vegan diet into introducing meat. And that's not an easy task because I've done that myself. Did it without the support, and so I know how important his work is. Samir Dossani, welcome to Low Carb and Fasting.
Thanks for having me.
Samir, why did you transition? I think that's the first question we need to answer here. Were you a happy vegan?
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, I was vegan between the ages of about 18, 19 and say 24, 25. So to be honest, I never really had the health issues myself. The reason that I sort of transitioned personally was because I had a job that was just making it near impossible. Now, the funny thing is that I became vegan, as many vegans will tell you, for ecological reasons, to support farmers and so on. And I had a job where I was actually supporting farmers. I was working in the human rights sector. I was going around and actually working with people. And yeah, they didn't really understand or appreciate my veganism, and they didn't think it was doing anything to support them. So I had to, just to survive, I can remember a few cases where I just felt so depleted after a weekend at a conference or whatever it was. So just to survive, I had to downgrade my status from vegan to vegetarian. And I remained vegetarian for many, many years after that. And then to sort of forward a little bit, what happened at some point after my daughter was born, it's my health as well, but more my wife's health really started to suffer. For me, that was something that, I used to take pride in, that I was someone who was a very supportive husband, a very sort of loving husband, someone who knew how to nourish my family. And the fact that it didn't seem, so right after the pregnancy, she got Hashimoto's thyroiditis, hypothyroidism. And then later on, she had very bad experience with kidney stones when our daughter was about 4 or 5 years old. And that was an indication to me that something was just not right at all. And so we began to change the diet from that time onwards.
So at that time, the change was just from a vegan to vegetarian diet?
No, so it was, we were already vegetarian. So we were living in India at the time. And if you know anything about India, it's not really possible to be vegan. It's fairly easy to be vegetarian in North India. But to be vegan like that is not really doable. There's a lot of dairy in that culture. So the change at that time was, we happened to have a doctor from Bengal, and she advised us that, Bengal is a part of India where they eat a lot of fish. So she advised us, maybe you want to consider introducing fish into the diet. So that was the first change that we made, was sort of lacto-ovo-vegetarian to sort of pescatarian, introducing fish into the diet. And then later on, so now fast forwarding a couple of years, I realized that was not going to be enough. So my personal story and where my sort of aha moment was, I didn't have time. I wasn't doing my own nutritional research at that time, nothing like that. But I used to like to play tennis on the weekends, yeah. And I would go, before I would play tennis on a Sunday morning, I would just fill up with a big bowl of oatmeal, yeah, massive bowl of oatmeal with some maple syrup and fruits. You can imagine, yeah. And I would have that at about 7:30. To be on the courts by about 8 o'clock. Yeah. And what happened to me this particular day, and it wasn't the first time it happened, but it was the most dramatic time, because I'd had a big bowl, like we're talking like 500 grams of oats or something like that, cooked oats. Like it's a big portion. And at 10 or 10:30, I was so ravenous, I couldn't stay on the courts. There's no, I had to, I was compelled. I really wanted to play. I was in the middle of a set or something. I had to tell my partners, I can't finish this match. I'm very sorry. We have to forfeit. And I went home and had another big bowl of oatmeal. So when that happened, I was like, okay, something is seriously not right. And then I began to research metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes and all the rest of it. But it was really that visceral feeling that, like, this as a type 1 diabetic better than I do. Like, there's that feeling that comes over when you have hypoglycemia setting in, where you're just, you cannot focus on anything except food. You just have to run.
Actually, that feeling of hypoglycemia kicks in just as your blood sugars are crashing. They don't have to reach that hypoglycemic level necessarily, but you start feeling hypoglycemic symptoms. You start feeling like diabetics would, when they're experiencing hypoglycemia at a much higher level as your blood sugars are crashing. So isn't that fascinating? So then obviously the low carbohydrate diet would have come in at that point in your life. How long ago was that?
To be honest, no. I mean, to be honest, the first thing I did was a multiple day fast. So I began to actually the very first thing I did was to get rid of the seed oils. So I had a big thing of canola oil or sunflower oil or maybe both in the house. I literally threw them in the garbage. You know, I got rid of them. I didn't even feel comfortable giving it to someone. I felt like this is poison. So I literally got rid of it, and I immediately started to have some improvement in my symptoms. So I had problems with my knees for some time. And they went away after a couple of weeks of not having seed oils. You know, not exactly sure why that's the case. When I talk with some experts, they say maybe it's inflammation, maybe it's something else. And then I think around the same time, I probably started eating more eggs, and my night vision. So I would have trouble driving I was only in my late 30s at this time, maybe early 40s. But I would have trouble driving my car at night because my night vision just sucked. I would feel like I can barely see. But I started eating more eggs, and maybe I started to cut down the carbs. And that was the second improvement, was my vision really improved a lot, my night vision specifically. And then after the 5-day fast, you know, that was really a big difference. That made a massive difference.
Yeah, I know how good you feel. You feel like almost like a newborn after a long fast. And this is why I love the extended fast. I haven't done one for a long time now, but as a type 1 diabetic, I've done a 5-day fast. I know how good you feel just afterwards. In fact, for months, for good 3 months, my insulin sensitivity is just brilliant and super good. That's what I love about it. So you had no mental or psychological sort of issues when it came to introducing meat into your diet, because that's one area where I struggled, and where a lot of I wasn't a vegan. Well, intermittently I was vegan, but for 30 years I was vegetarian. I didn't eat enough eggs, nowhere close to enough eggs. I assumed wrongly, now I know it was wrong, that protein from plants were sufficient, that I didn't need animal protein. And until I found out that I wasn't absorbing those nutrients. In fact, not just the protein, but the nutrients. I wasn't absorbing those. So, but did you have any sort of mental or psychological issues when it came to introducing meat?
Yeah, of course. In the beginning, one isn't comfortable with that, right? When you're avoiding meat because you think it's the more ethical way to eat. Now, for me, there was a flip side to this, which is that I had been in close contact with farmers who were sort of struggling for their lives. I'm talking about people like the MST in Brazil, the Landless Peoples Movements, people like the Via Campesina, which is a global network of small farmers, you know, very poor small farmers who try and organize to win some human rights. And I knew from talking with those people that you really can't claim that vegetarian food is more ethical than non-vegetarian food. Like, there's nothing in there. Like, there's zero to make that claim, because the system is so unethical as a whole that no matter what you're buying, you're party to a system that is really exploiting lots of people, that involves child labor, that is really, really awful if you're buying from the mainstream system. And so what I was always doing in India and here in South Africa, and even in the US when I was living in the US, it's always trying to support that alternative smallholder system to the extent that you can. Whether you do it with vegetarian food or meat food, like, it's not really that relevant. You need to just find a way to support it. And unless you're and until you're doing that, I don't think you can call yourself part of the solution. So in my mind, these kind of like the ethics of what's on the plate, I had dealt with that like 20 years ago, because the shift from veganism to vegetarianism to me was already, you know, any ethical issues were going to come at that point. And now it was more about health and diet and being able to take care of my family in a good way.
Let's talk about proteins. What makes plant proteins nutritionally lacking?
Yeah, this is a really great question. So there are 500 amino acids. So proteins, of course, are just made of amino acids. There are something like 500 total amino acids, but only 20 of those are actually used in biology. Only 20 of them are in our bodies or in most animal bodies. Out of the 29 are what we call essential amino acids, meaning that you have to get them from food. And the remaining 11 the body can make. But some of those 11, what I would say is that they are conditionally necessary. So yes, the body can make it, but you don't want to always be putting the body in a position where it has to make it. Otherwise, you're going to face deficiencies at some point. That said, what are the foods that have the right amino acids in the right ratios? Well, they're animal foods 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just finishing research on a video that I may release later today or tomorrow, which is reviewing someone else's, vegan high protein, what I eat in a day. So this is someone who's a vegan who's made a video saying that they're it's a high protein video. And what I did was high protein meals. And what I did in this video is I'm using two different scores, measures of the amino acid quality. So there's PDCAS and there's DIAS. You don't need to worry about what they stand for, but they're measures of protein quality based on this idea of limiting amino acids. So all of your vegetarian foods, all of your plant-based foods are going to have one or more limiting amino acid. Lysine is the most common when I'm looking at these measures and so on, but could be others too. I think leucine, isoleucine, some of these other things are also the limiting amino acids. And what we find, though this person is marketing his video as a high protein, what I eat in a day, when you look at the actual protein digestibility, out of his 3 meals, only one is actually crossing the bar of what I would call a high protein meal, which for me is 30 grams of digestible protein in that meal, 30 to 50 grams. And the remaining two, one is sort of close, like I would say 20, I think the figure is around 20. The remaining one is like 5 grams of protein. Mm-hmm. So it can tell you that even someone who's considering themselves enough of an expert to make a video on vegan high protein meals, they're not getting anywhere close to what they need to. So it tells you what does that mean for the average person? The average person is probably doing much, much worse and really not hitting their protein targets. And again, if you're 20 years old, I don't know that it's that relevant. But as we get older, we need, our ability to recycle and synthesize amino acids from our own body, our ability to cannibalize our own body, if you want to put it in those terms, becomes less. Mm-hmm. And therefore, getting the good quality amino acids in the right ratios from animal foods becomes all the more important.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was, when I switched to eating meat, I was already eating eggs, but I still wasn't feeling optimal. There was something missing. And the missing link for me turned out to be meat, red meat. I very reluctantly started eating meat. It wasn't an easy transition. It wasn't easy. And my reasons were not necessarily ethical, as it is in most cases. Mine were more psychological. That idea of chewing on flesh, animal meat.
For sure.
And that was the most difficult part for me. So now I think that leads me to kind of my next question, which is about digestive enzymes.
Because before we talk about enzymes, Nayiri, if you don't mind, let me ask you a question about if you can recall, do you remember about how many eggs were you consuming per day during that period when you were eating more eggs and not yet introducing meat?
For my type 1 diabetes, I'd figured out at that point, and this was only 2 years ago, that my blood sugars do very well on one meal a day, OMAD. So it had to be OMAD for me. Now the question was, in that one meal, how many eggs could I eat? I didn't put any limits on eggs. I wasn't afraid of eggs. I was very happy. And in fact, I enjoy the taste of eggs. And the most I could eat in one meal was 9 eggs, which by that point, I'd also started weightlifting. It wasn't sufficient for me. It wasn't enough. Protein in a single egg is like 6 grams. And now I eat a lot more than, 60 or 65 grams per day, a lot more. And I thrive on that. So I knew that I had to start eating meat. By the way, I tried, and this is my next question on digestive enzymes leading to supplements, because I knew I had to start eating meat, but I put it off. And I thought, what if supplements would solve the issue for me? Because I was experiencing unexplained fatigue. I just couldn't explain it. Something I hadn't experienced before. And eggs alone just wasn't enough for me. It wasn't doing it for me. I did eat dairy, wasn't doing it for me. I was still eating a lot of plants at that point, and organically grown, by the way, grown in my garden. And I had digestive issues, a number of digestive sort of problems. So I had to reduce the plants. But now, so what would I eat? I was just left with eggs at the end of it, which really puts you in a desperate situation because you have to start eating meat. You don't necessarily want to. I tried supplements. I didn't do it. But I was even taking desiccated liver. Again, it didn't solve my problem. When I started eating meat, it was within 3 months I noticed the difference. Within 3 months, which probably is a very short time. But I noticed, well, I no longer have that fatigue, because by 2 p.m. in the afternoon, I just collapsed before. So yes, low carbohydrate was good. The keto diet was good. All of that was good on my blood sugars, but I wasn't feeling optimal. So that's my answer to you. So talking of digestive enzymes, but maybe you would like to comment on supplements. I think in one of your videos, you mentioned that not all supplements are bioavailable.
For sure. No, for sure. I mean, this whole question of supplements is extremely complicated. And for me, as someone who's got a certification in nutrition, but also doing my own research, I'm very reluctant to sort of say these work, these don't work. Like, it really depends on the person, right? So I think if we're looking at supplements, so I think the first mistake that I see people make with supplements is that they like the initial reaction is, okay, I need to supplement, so I need to take a multivitamin. That is probably the most terrible thing you can do. Like, not to say that the multivitamin is absorbable or not absorbable, but if let's say, for example, you're deficient in, most vegetarians and vegans I see are deficient in iron and B12, or at least one of those. Yeah. Now, if you try and cover that with a broad spectrum, like a full multivitamin, you are reducing the chance of you being able to correct that. So it's important that we think about vitamins and minerals as very discrete imbalances. And if you have a imbalance, for example, with B12, you want to supplement with B12. You don't want to supplement with something that has B12 in it. There are exceptions to this. So, for example, if you're deficient in other B vitamins, B12 is kind of an exception. But if you're deficient in B6, you probably don't want to just supplement B6, because that can cause even further imbalances. So you probably want to take a B complex, right? B12 is, again, worth talking a little bit more about, because there's two forms of B12, cyanocobalamin and methylcobalamin. And most of the vegetarian-friendly supplements you will find, or vegan-friendly supplements, are cyanocobalamin, which are just not, again, some people may be able to convert that into methylcobalamin, but chances are, if you have an issue, because that's what's already in, if you're a vegan, that's already what's in your soy milk, your oat milk, all the fortified foods you've been taking already have the cyanocobalamin. So if you're deficient, chances are you're not doing a very good job of converting that into methylcobalamin, the actual active form. So this is one example. And then there's other examples where there's some supplements where just there's so little evidence to recommend using that supplement, even in sort of emergency cases. So I'm thinking here of like calcium. The data on calcium supplementation basically says, from what I can tell, either in best case scenario, it does no harm. But what seems to be the evidence is that it actually causes heart disease. Like, it seems to be causally linked to the creation of calcified plaques in arteries, including coronary arteries. And so, it's come across my desk once or twice. We hear someone, often it's not usually my client, often it's the mother of my client, older people, who maybe have been taking calcium supplements since they were first recommended to in like the 1980s or 1990s. And then suddenly you have this woman, okay, she's older, she's in her 80s or late 70s, early 80s, whatever it may be, but she has no risk for heart disease. And suddenly she's had a heart attack. And that makes me question, okay, was it the supplement that was doing this? Of course, it's not proof. I can't prove that that's the case. But based on the data, I would say that's a possibility. And so some supplements we just have to be very careful of.
It's interesting. I love this. I love talking about supplements, because they didn't necessarily do it for me. They didn't remove my fatigue. So there must have been a reason I wasn't fully absorbing the supplements. And, I would not necessarily go for the most expensive supplements, but I would check the ingredients to make sure they don't have emulsifiers, they don't have wheat or potato starch, because I'm type 1 diabetic and very specific about supplements. So in that respect, I would buy the cleanest supplement and quite often pay a fortune for those supplements. But what I do remember is that fortunately I don't take any of those, like the big complex and whatever. But what I do remember is that most of the supplements would have the vegan label underneath. And that probably was, now with hindsight, that probably was the reason, because these were the plant forms of the vitamins or the minerals that my body craved. But little did I know that I wasn't really absorbing those fully.
Yeah.
So
I mean, on the flip side, you mentioned that you were taking desiccated liver as well and not having great results with that either. So I just think there's something about, if you can get these minerals and vitamins in an active food matrix, like I just think that that's going to be much healthier for all of us in the long run. And if you can't do that for whatever reason, so different people have different circumstances, and there's all kinds of crazy stories about, okay, I just can't eat this, it's not possible. Then yeah, you can use supplementation, but keep in mind that it may not be addressing the issue, and probably you just want to do it in a time-bound kind of way. Probably you want to assess again in a few months and then see if you can introduce those foods that were more difficult for you.
The other thing was collagen, of course, because I thought, well, that's in powder form, and it was pure marine collagen, and it had that fishy smell. But mixing it in my eggs, I thought, yeah, I can do that. That's easy. That's easier than chewing on meat. And of course, then I noticed, wow, I'm mixing it in my eggs, good, like 2 tablespoons of this marine collagen with no additives to it, and my blood sugar is spiking because it's obviously there's something, it's different if I were to eat the fish or a piece of steak. It could take up to 8 hours before I notice any rise in my blood sugars. But with the powdered form of collagen, it was like instant. It could have been, it could easily have been, I thought, what's happening here? Is this like wheat? Because it might as well have been just white flour for me. So I stopped using that too. And then I had to start eating meat.
No, for sure. I mean, remember, these things are highly processed foods, even if it's pure protein or whatever. And remember that pure protein will spike your blood sugar, not as much as pure carbohydrates, but it does, right? So I think when trying to avoid powders, like there was, when we talk about, there's an article I read about, these incretins and so on, GLP-1 agonists and so on. And what it was arguing was that, it doesn't matter so much, this particular paper. So I would say the bulk of the evidence says it matters whether it's a carbohydrate or a protein. But this particular paper that I'm talking about was arguing that it doesn't matter if it's a protein or a carbohydrate. What matters is the texture, because the esophagus, the digestive tract, it just sees that there's a powder coming in, and it's going to spike your insulin response and all the other things. So again, that's just one paper. I don't think it's enough to prove anything, but I do think there's something to be said for trying to get everything in the food matrix, as opposed to in powder or pill form.
I agree. I'm an example of that. I mean, I just reluctantly introduced meat, and within 3 months, I was a different person. So what are the first sort of baby steps you recommend to your clients when they come to you, when they need support, when introducing meat? What are the first few suggestions, maybe? It depends on the person, right? I mean, of course, yeah. Each person is different, but usually, what sorts of things do you recommend?
Yes. So when we're looking at the sort of ex-vegan journey, there are patterns that happen, and these are not patterns that I will recommend. So if someone is ready to, for example, introduce beef, then that's where we're going. Like, beef is number one. But most people, when they come to me, are not necessarily ready at that level. So I'll say, okay, where are you right now? Are you on fish? Are you on eggs? Are you on dairy? Like, tell me where you are. And then based on that, what happens, and you would know this as well with your clients, Nayiri, is that you are able to make recommendations that have some benefits that the client can see right away. And that builds up trust. So once we had for example, I had a client who, recovering from a very bad case of COVID, 2 pulmonary embolisms in each lung. He had a good, in British terms, he had a couple of stone to lose. He had maybe 20 or 30 kilos to lose. Yeah. Maybe more, 50 or 60 kilos. Yeah. So he was a big guy. And I said, and I, based on, where he was, I was like, okay, so you're going to do alternate day eating. You're going to eat one meal every second day. This was, he came to this. I didn't suggest this, by the way. This is what he suggested. And, he wasn't financially, he wasn't in a very strong place. So what he was going to do, he was going to save the money that he was spending on food and buy better quality food. So for example, he would have a tin of smoked oysters every day, which had all of his B12 and many other, new oysters are one of those new superfoods that I think is a bit neglected in the carnivore and keto spaces. Like it's an amazing food. So he would have that every day. And after doing that for like a week, he was in an amazing place. He was gardening. He was thinking about moving to a new country and starting a new life. Like he was just in a very, very, whereas before he had maybe been even having sort of suicidal thoughts, and he was going through a divorce and this kind of thing. So in terms of his physical health, mental health, everything, just by a few interventions, he was able to improve so much that then when that happens, then he's like, okay, so what do you recommend? Now he credits me, although he's the one who's come up with this process, but I've given him options within that. So he credits me with sort of turning around his life. And at that point, I can say, okay, well, that point he says to me, well, what do you think I should do next, right? And I'll say, well, are you ready to introduce beef or not? And he said, no, absolutely, let's do it. Because at that point they're very excited. And so you can get, foods that would have been very difficult. Liver, chicken, with women especially, we tend to see iron deficiencies. And iron deficiencies, we tend to recommend liver, especially chicken liver or pork liver are the ones that are very high in iron. And, the first time I'll maybe gently mention that, very few people are jumping at the chance to have chicken liver, But after some working with me and seeing some small improvements, then it's like, okay, man, let's do it. I'm eating chicken. Let me try the chicken liver and see what happens. So it's a slow process. It's an iterative process. It's a process of, it has to be led by the client. I cannot impose my own views. But sometimes I have very curious clients who ask me lots of questions. And if they ask me questions, my instinct is just to tell people the truth. Like, if they're asking me what I prefer, I'll tell them what I prefer. Sometimes I won't do it, but that's fine. But it's just like, okay, this is my ideal diet for you would be X, but you're not there yet. So let's take step by step by step. How are you going to get there?
It is a slow process. And 2 years on, it's been 2 years, exactly 2 years, in fact, two years and a few days.
Okay.
For me. And there are still certain things I can't eat, like organ meats. Not that I haven't tried. Cook them with onions, spice them up. I've tried every suggestion. I cannot still eat organ meats. I want to celebrate my successes instead of, looking at the things that I'm still not eating, right? If I can't eat the organ meats, then, I focus on the things I can eat and eat more of those, like beef, for example. I struggle with a big chunky steak, but I'm okay if it's ground up. So I bring the steak and I grind it up, and I'm perfectly fine with that. But seeing a big chunky steak in front of me still brings traumatic sort of thoughts into
it's not,
yes, I
it's
struggle
not
with
easy.
that.
I mean, we're talking about, so I think it's important to emphasize, we're talking not just about changing the food that we eat, but we're talking about changing our identity, right? You were vegetarian for 30 years. That's a long time. And
That's a long time.
Yeah. And so
I didn't
any
eat
movement.
fish, so I'm still struggling with if the fish in my plate, for example, and some people might identify with the things I'm talking about. So, if the piece of meat, be it fish or whatever, in my plate looks like the animal it came from,
Yes,
then that would completely put me off, and
sure.
I won't be able to eat it. And so a nicely grilled fish, I'm very happy with grilled or baked or whatever, fried fish, but it mustn't have the skin on, and it can't have the tail and
Sure.
and the head on. So because if I see that, then it's difficult for me to eat it. So
it triggers you, sure.
Yeah, it triggers traumatic feel sort of thoughts, and I just put the plate away. So I focus instead on things that I can eat. So I buy oily fish, and I like salmon, for example, is readily available here in the UK. And I focus on that. I've started eating sardines, the whole thing with the bones and the skin, but I just literally mash it up, like almost like puree it and squeeze some lemon over it. And that's fine too. So I have to find ways to help myself eat the meat. And that's what I would recommend to people who are transitioning. Just take tiny steps and perhaps serve that piece of meat in a way that would be easy for you to eat.
Yeah. No, it's very important, but I think it's also important to mention that when we are talking about these, when you're eating foods for the nutritional value, it's important that you combine them with the right thing. So the easiest thing, so you mentioned the mashing the fish, the easiest thing would be to put that on a piece of toast and eat it, or in a corn tortilla or something like this. But we know that greatly limits the insulin issues aside. So the insulin resistance issues aside, let's say that you're insulin sensitive, you can have a piece of bread without it killing you, no problem. But you're getting fewer nutrients when you're having that with complex carbohydrates, as opposed to when you're having it on its own. So maybe it's a deal you do with yourself, that like the first week you have it with these carbs, but then after that you try not to. Maybe that's the strategy. I don't know. Different strategies are going to work for different people.
You're a carnivore now, are you? Yeah, you're a carnivore, or close to carnivore.
No, not really. So at the moment, how I eat is, I would say my first meal of the day is pretty close to pure carnivore. Like I'm talking about red meat and eggs, and it's a lot. Like my first meal of the day is quite heavy. It's what fills me up. And then my second meal of the day, I'll have what the family's having, more or less. I'm not super picky about it. If there's a vegetable, we're here in the wintertime in South Africa, if there's a vegetable soup or something, I might have a little bit of it. But I'll also have meat, of course. With that second meal, I'll also try and hit my at least 30 grams of protein as well. But it's not as that first meal is massive, and it's definitely red meat and probably eggs and possibly cheese as well. That second meal could be lighter, could be chicken, could be anything really.
Tell us more about eggs and why. What makes them superfood?
Yeah, to be honest, when it comes to protein, I mean, this is kind of what I was getting to in the earlier discussion about eggs. Eggs don't have as much protein as you probably think they do, or as many people, but many people may not know that eggs are not a super great source of protein, in the sense that you need to eat a certain quantity of it, right? So you need to eat 5 or 6 eggs, depending on who you are, your size, and so on. But I think minimum to get what I would consider a proper bolus of protein, you're talking about 5 eggs. And when I'm talking to Indian vegetarians, for example, who are some of my clients, they're not hitting anywhere near that in a meal. Like it's 2 or 3 eggs if you're lucky, right? So I think being clear about that. The other vegetarian source of protein is cheese, which actually has more protein than you might think. It's a pretty good source of protein. Now, eggs in particular, egg yolks in particular, it's not just the protein, it's also the vitamins and the minerals and the trace minerals that are in those yolks especially. So what I will also do sometimes when I'm feeling like I have the energy, I've been a little bit lazy to do it recently, but I will take a big, I'll warm up some cream, and I'll take a good maybe 7 or 8 egg yolks, and I'll make a kind of carnivore dessert, right? Just egg yolks, cream, make a little custard. If you want to put a couple drops of stevia or some other sweetener, you can. And that's, for me, in my culture, dessert is still a big thing, even though I try and avoid it as much as I can. And we all have our issues with carb addiction and so on. But I will make a little, slightly sweet custard for myself. And, if I have, that lasts me maybe 2 servings. So if I made it with 10 eggs, that's 5 eggs per serving. That's pretty good. 5 egg yolks as an additional sort of multivitamin dose. That's not bad.
No, in fact, you have you have a video where you show how you make protein shake. You call it protein shake, but it doesn't include any protein powders, right? Which is great.
Oh.
So you use yogurt. In fact, what I could see,
maybe whole eggs,
from what I could see, it was like, it wasn't sort of watery yogurt. It was probably strained. It was what we call in the UK Greek yogurt,
100%.
which is even more protein rich. So you use yogurt and egg yolks to break your fast with. I like that idea. I've never had raw eggs, but blended together in with yogurt. I love yogurt, so Greek yogurt particularly. So maybe it's something I could do. I could try.
Yeah, I mean, what I would recommend to do is maybe mix that with a bit of water so that it becomes the right consistency. So in India, we have this, lassi, like a kind of yogurt drink. You have similar things in Turkey. I believe also in Armenia, you have a similar thing as well.
Right. And the whole of Middle East, so you have yogurt drinks in various different forms. So just mix eggs in, egg yolks in. I'd never even thought of that.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, it's when you're talking about why is that first meal post fasting super important? Because how do I explain it? So this is not technically scientifically correct, but just imagine that after a long period of fasting, your cells are kind of like a little bit dehydrated, a little bit withered, even though you've been hydrating and having electrolytes and so on, you've been doing your best, but those cells are a little bit weak and they're looking for nourishment. So whatever you have for that first meal is super important because that's going to go right into the cells. And there's lots of studies indicating that first meal post fasting is extremely important. So that's why egg yolks is a great thing. I think yogurt can help. I personally like to just have a steak as the first meal post fasting as well. Maybe some combination of these, a steak with a yogurt drink and some egg yolks.
Let's talk about fasting because you do extended fasts, and it's rare to find people who are doing extended fasts, and because people are considering like a 12 hours of not eating a form of fast, and yes, maybe it is 12 hours of not eating, but there's a big difference in the benefits of fasting, between 12 hours of not eating and five days of not eating. So why do you do extended fasts? And what benefits have you noticed?
Yeah, so this is one of those things that I'm still doing at my age. So I'm 47 now. I think as I get older, I would probably do fewer of these. So why do I say that? I get benefits because the typical things that think people talk about with fasting. So for me, it's just easier to fast than to try and have any kind of discipline around the number of calories, etc., the quantity of food that I eat. When I eat, I fill myself up. I don't stop, right? When I feel like, and I also am someone who, if I'm on holiday or if I'm visiting my family, I no longer need to be as strict as I used to at one point. I can just relax a little bit, have a little ice cream or something with my daughter if she wants, To me, it's more important to model a bit of openness with my daughter, especially because she's a teenage girl and I don't want any hint of any kind of eating disorder or anything like that. So for me, it's a little bit more valuable to like share an ice cream with her than to be 100% strict on my diet in every particular circumstance, right? But that said, you do, at my age, you do end up gaining a few pounds. You do end up maybe with, not at the maintenance weight that you want to be. And so after that vacation is done, I'll say, okay, it's time I don't really do the 5-day fast anymore, but I do 3-day fasts. So it's time for me to just, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we fast. And then on Thursday morning, I have a big breakfast. And I feel, you feel good. It really resets any kind of insulin resistance that may have been there, any kind of just sort of tired feeling, sort of heavy feeling that may have been there. It's also a very clever way for me to deal with jet lag. So when I travel on the plane, I try not to eat on the plane and only eat when I'm, in the correct time, in the time zone for breakfast or for lunch or whatever it is. So fasting serves multiple purposes. As I get older, I'll probably do less of it because maintaining muscle mass, every time you fast, you are going to lose a little bit of muscle mass. And as you get older, I think maintaining that muscle mass it has to take priority. So not to say that I wouldn't do a fast, but maybe I wouldn't do a 36-hour fast. Maybe I wouldn't do a 3-day fast, a 72-hour fast. Maybe I would do a 36-hour fast instead, which is still all right. 36 hours is not too bad. But you're not getting the kind of longer autophagy related things that you see after 2 or 3 or 5 days of fasting. But I think that's okay. As long as you're aware of the trade-offs, I think decisions around fasting will change depending on what age you are.
I've just turned 50 a few days ago, actually, but I'm not doing extended fasts now, so 5-day fasts. But I did two. I did 2 long fasts, 90 hours and 100 hours to regain insulin sensitivity after a period of overindulging in, well, low carbohydrate treats, low carbohydrate, because that's what I have to do for my blood sugars. But even, overindulgence in low carbohydrates, sort of nut flour, like almond flour, sort of pizzas and desserts. There comes a time you notice the difference in your blood sugars and in the insulin requirements. That's why I did. But primarily, did it because people say you shouldn't do it as type 1 diabetic. And I haven't been able to find a single evidence-based reason not to do it. I can't find a reason. So apart from the safety, you have to be safe, you have to do it cleverly.
Sure.
Obviously, you have to do it within safe limits, but I did it to show the world that
it's possible.
You can do it. You can do it as type 1 diabetic if you want to. It's not something that everyone should do. In fact,
out of curiosity,
never do it either. But
out of curiosity, were you injecting or were you on a pump during the time, or how were you?
On a pump. So I just reduced my insulin and everything went fine, and it shows the world that you can do it as type 1 diabetic. And if someone says you shouldn't do it because you're type 1, you can just basically tell them that's nonsense, because type 1 diabetes and fasting, I genuinely wanted to find evidence where it's proven that which shows that type 1 diabetics should not engage in longer fasts. I couldn't find it. The dangers were all around, insulin management and lower blood sugars. But if you're doing safely, then
I mean, they think if you skip a meal, you're gonna go hypoglycemic or something ridiculous like this. I mean, I think when you're the one who's monitoring your CGM and you're the one who's dosing your pump, I think you know better than anyone else what you can do and what you can't.
I do want to comment, Samir, because you did mention the when you get older, it's harder to build muscle. Yes, I agree with that, and I did lose some muscle mass, not a huge amount, but some muscle mass on my longer fast, just after my longer fast, 100-hour fast, which is just under 5 days. But I actually gained it all back within a few days of resistance training. All my muscle mass came back. When they talk of muscle memory, there's definitely science to it. There must be science to it. When they, my personal trainer, for example, kept telling me muscle memory, if you don't exercise, you don't work out for a period of time, and you get back to it, your muscles will remember that they were used to working hard. And all my muscle mass, in fact, and more, came back when I started resistance training within a few days. So I'm not even convinced of the statement of, okay, so your muscles will go and they will not come back. Did it? Mine came back. And I'm type 1 diabetic. And I wasn't 50 then, but I'm 50 now. So I just don't want to do a longer fast now, because I've done it and I showed the world it can be done. And I just I do the occasional 32-hour, just skip a day of eating. But
I think you're right. I think in general, if we think about, for me as an anthropologist as well, if you think about how people would have been eating, of course you would have skipped a day of eating, at some point.
Yeah.
So it's not really, in my view, there's not much to debate here. It can be done. Like anything else, there's trade-offs. And, for many of us, it's probably an under-recommended therapy. Let's put it that way. So I'm going to continue doing it for at least another, few years, then see.
Yeah, there's definitely benefits to fasting, but of course, I mean, it has to be choice. It has to be choice. If you are choosing to do fasting, no one can stop you. If you're type 1 diabetic, that's the most dangerous context that I can think of, because you have to adjust, blood sugars. Sorry, your insulin levels. But even then, if you're doing it safely, nothing can stop you if you want to do it. So I was talking about digestive enzymes. It took me a whole year for my stomach to get used to digesting meat. So do you find out
Yeah.
with your clients?
Fortunately, so have I heard stories of people who have to take digestive enzymes for like their whole life?
Took them for a whole
Absolutely.
year. Oh, really?
Yeah.
I took them for a
Yeah.
year, and then I realized I don't need them anymore.
So Lier, so one of my first interviews on my YouTube is with someone called Lier Keith, who's an ex-vegan who was
Mm-hmm.
featured in the Sacred Cow documentary,
Yeah.
among other places. And she's still on them. And it's been, I don't know, 10 years or longer since, it's been 10 years since she wrote her book. So I think it's been like 15 years since she introduced meat. She still takes them every day as far as I know. But most of my clients, touch wood, haven't really done that much damage. So we use it, you can use it transitionally, and definitely you can use things like betaine hydrochloride, which is an acidifier to acidify the stomach so that it can digest meat properly. So, sometimes the betaine hydrochloride stays a little bit longer, like 6 months to a year. But the digestive enzymes we generally find within 6 to 8 weeks, no longer that necessary for most people. But keep in mind, most of my clients are still, younger than you or I. Most people we find in this generation, they went vegan maybe around 2010, between 2010 and 2012, maybe. And they would have done that in their late teens, early 20s. And so we're talking about people who are under 35 by and large, maybe 40. So at that age, I think you can get away with it. Whereas at our age, I think it becomes more difficult if anyone's reintroducing these foods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I took. I took the betaine HCl, but um, just that I thought I don't need them anymore. Chicken, for me, chicken was the last thing I introduced, which in fact, we're in the same group called Vegan Restoration something. And I occasionally see your comments in there. And most people seem to find chicken the first meat type of meat to introduce. For me, it was the last. It came after sort of red meat. And I wasn't taking my digestive enzyme at that point. And then after my first meal of chicken, it was just struggle. I think now I've learned that with each new form of meat, I probably for a short period of time, I need my betaine HCl to help me digest that particular form of meat. Isn't that fascinating? So now when I'm eating beef, I don't need to take it. Still with chicken, I take it. But there will come a time when I won't need it for chicken either, because that was the last form of meat I introduced.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with chicken is that it's almost pure protein. So when you're talking about just from a biochemical point of view, you're going to need a higher stomach acidity to digest almost pure protein than beef, which is like almost pure protein means, let's say it's 50% protein, 50% water, as opposed to beef, which depends on the cut of beef, but we're talking about 30% protein, 25% fat, and the rest water, right? So yeah, these it's quite complicated. But I think your takeaway, which is that when you introduce a new food, you might need a bit to use these supplements to help you. I think that's the right takeaway.
Samir, we're getting very close to wrapping up. We covered the generally low carbohydrate diet, the deficiencies of the vegan diet. We talked about fasting. We talked about supplements. We talked about eggs. You have a video on energy toxicity. Let's wrap it up with that. Because, I mean, if people are eating protein in animal products, that's a very good thing if they've just recently started introducing meat. But you are still talking about something they could potentially put themselves in a situation of energy toxicity. What is it?
Sure.
And who should be careful of it?
So what we have to keep in mind is that when people choose to leave or make the decision to leave veganism, they are, generally speaking, they're not in good health, right? And we can already begin to guess the kind of not good health that they're in. They are probably to some extent insulin resistant. And I'm saying this myself as a vegan. What was I eating? I used to come home after I would go out and have dinner with my friends, and then I would come home and make my own like pasta with peanut sauce and like broccoli and stuff. Yeah. So I'm having extra pasta at like midnight, and I already had pasta at like 8 or 9 in the evening anyway. And then in addition to rice for lunch and cereal for breakfast, like the amount of carbohydrates here is crazy.
Yeah.
Now, into that way of eating, imagine that together with my midnight pasta, imagine that I had put some ribeye steak, because everyone's saying I should eat ribeye steak. What am I doing? I'm keeping the same number of carbohydrates. I haven't changed that at all, but I'm adding fats, very good, very necessary fats and vitamins and so on that are necessary. But I'm probably making my insulin resistance at least a little bit worse, because I'm adding more energy into the mix. And we know that the combination of, carbohydrates and fats is potentially problematic for some people. This is the Randall hypothesis, the Randall cycle. Bart Kay has lots of videos about this for those who are interested in spending their time there. I don't go as far as Bart Kay to say that that's like the root of every chronic illness. I don't think that there's evidence for that. But it can be problematic if you're already on your road towards insulin resistance, and then you just add more fat. So what I'm saying is you have to, when you are reintroducing these foods, you need to reduce certain things just as you're increasing certain things. And I think as a vegan, because when I was vegan, I was always hungry and I had an unlimited appetite. I could eat any time of the day or night, didn't matter if I had just eaten. So because many people are coming from that sort of mindset that, oh my God, I'm so hungry, and you're obsessed with food. And especially if you've not been well, you're extremely obsessed with food because you're like, why isn't this food healing me? Why isn't it healing me, right? So there's a bit of mental work to be done. There's a bit of like, okay, let's just calm down. Let's calm the system down. We're not in fight or flight. We're getting very nutritious food. This is why I like broths, by the way, during this transition period, because broths fill you up without a whole lot of carbohydrate triggers. Broths can also extremely nutritious, extremely nourishing. Somehow, even people who are not used to eating broths, you give them a cup of like hot chicken soup, and they just feel comforted. If there's something psychological about that food in all of our cultures, I think, not just in any specific culture. So I think like, using that kind of like those hugs, those animal foods that are like a warm hug, and they're also kind of filling. You can have, if you water down the broth, it can be extremely filling. I think that's the strategy to go with to sort of reduce the overall amount of food. Because if you're on your way to insulin resistance, you want to do that. You want to use fasting or some other trick to just make sure you're not eating all the time.
So by energy toxicity, we're particularly talking about, combining higher fat and higher protein.
Higher carb. No, the protein tends to be
higher carb.
Yeah. The protein tends to be not really an issue. It's hard to overeat protein, unless you're going to take powders and stuff like this. But if you're eating it in the context of a whole food matrix, the protein is not really the issue. We want people to introduce the healthy animal fats that are really needed for, hormone imbalances and many other things. And at the same time, take away some of these carbohydrates that frankly, you probably become addicted to as a vegan or a vegetarian.
And particularly wheat. You mentioned that in one of your videos. Wheat should be the first thing to go.
For most of us, yeah. I mean, especially because a lot of my clients also have developed some kind of autoimmune disease. So we know that gluten, the gliadin protein of wheat, opens these tight junctions in the intestine, which can trigger it can allow other things in. The wheat itself can trigger an autoimmune reaction, but it can allow other things which will trigger a series of autoimmune reactions. So in general, I would say, yeah, bread is sort of top of mind. If someone says, what's the first thing, technically speaking, if you ask a normal dietitian or a normal nutritionist, what should I get rid of? If they have any sense, they'll say desserts. And I don't disagree with that. But for me, even before dessert is kind of like wheat, because it's like, that's one thing that's just making so much unnecessary toxicity in your body. And I think it's pretty easy to replace.
We've run out of time. I know you have a client, so I don't want to run over. Thank you so much for your time today, Samir, and hopefully we can do this again in the future and discuss other topics that you're passionate about and you cover in your channel. I'll put the link below in the description so people can follow your channel, can find your website as well, and can contact you if they need support with nutrition or health coaching.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nayiri. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye for now. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.